You think Thanksgiving breakfast was just leftover pie and cold turkey? Think again. Before the parade came on and guests started arriving, grandmothers across America were already in their kitchens creating morning feasts that rivaled dinner itself. Let's dig into 30 classic Thanksgiving breakfasts Grandma made that we desperately need again. Pumpkin spice waffles with maple butter were once the centerpiece of Thanksgiving morning, filling kitchens with cinnamon warmth before the turkey even touched the oven. Grandmothers mixed pumpkin puree directly into waffle batter along with nutmeg, ginger, and cloves, creating golden squares that were crispy outside and pillowy soft within. The maple butter was whipped by hand, combining softened butter with pure maple syrup until fluffy and spreadable. These weren't quick breakfasts, but intentional creations, made in heavy cast iron waffle irons. Families gathered around the table while waffles came off the iron one by one. Children fought over corner pieces where the batter crisped darkest. This breakfast gave everyone energy for the marathon of cooking ahead. The aroma announced that Thanksgiving had officially begun. Today's frozen waffles can't touch the satisfaction of watching Grandma pour batter and flip the iron with perfect timing. Sausage gravy over buttermilk biscuits was the hearty foundation that fueled families through Thanksgiving morning cooking marathons. Grandmothers started with bulk pork sausage, breaking it into crumbles in cast iron skillets until the meat browned and fat rendered out. Flour was sprinkled directly into the drippings, stirred constantly until it formed a roux that would thicken the milk. Whole milk was added slowly, creating a sauce that was peppery, rich, and substantial. The biscuits were made from scratch hours earlier, using cold buttermilk and lard to create layers that flaked apart. Each biscuit was torn in half and covered with generous ladles of gravy. This breakfast appeared on tables across the South, where Thanksgiving meant feeding crowds. Men especially loved this meal, knowing it would sustain them through hours of work. The combination created comfort that modern fast food will never match. Sweet potato hash browns were the colorful alternative to regular breakfast potatoes, bringing Thanksgiving flavors to the morning table. Grandmothers shredded raw sweet potatoes by hand using box graters, creating orange strands that were squeezed dry in kitchen towels. The shreds were mixed with diced onions, salt, black pepper, and sometimes brown sugar. Cast iron skillets were heated with bacon grease until shimmering. Then the mixture was pressed down firmly. The hash browns cooked slowly, developing a golden crust before being flipped. The result was sweet, savory, and satisfying, with caramelized edges that crunched between teeth. These appeared on breakfast tables throughout November. Children initially suspicious of the orange color quickly became converts after tasting the caramelized sweetness. Sweet potato hash browns represented resourcefulness, turning a dinner ingredient into something breakfast-worthy. Cranberry orange muffins were the tart-sweet breakfast that balanced richer Thanksgiving morning dishes with bright, fresh flavor. Grandmothers baked these the night before Thanksgiving, using fresh cranberries that burst during baking and orange zest that perfumed the kitchen. The batter combined flour, sugar, eggs, and buttermilk into something tender and moist. Orange zest was grated directly into the mix, releasing oils that made every bite taste like citrus. The muffins baked until their tops domed and cracked slightly. A simple orange glaze was drizzled over the tops while still warm. These muffins were practical because they could be made ahead, freeing up oven space on Thanksgiving morning. Families grabbed them while rushing through preparations. The combination of tart cranberry and bright orange felt distinctly Thanksgiving. Today's bakery muffins can't match the real fruit flavor Grandma achieved. Apple cider. French toast transformed ordinary breakfast bread into something that tasted like concentrated autumn. Grandmothers soaked thick slices of day-old bread in a mixture of eggs, apple cider, cinnamon, and vanilla, letting each piece absorb the liquid. The cider added natural apple sweetness and tang that regular milk couldn't provide. Cast iron griddles were buttered generously, then the soaked bread was laid down to cook slowly until golden brown. The bread puffed up as it cooked, creating custardy interiors. Served with butter and warm maple syrup, this breakfast felt celebratory and special. Families loved it because it used up bread that might otherwise go stale. The apple cider flavor connected breakfast to the season's apple-picking traditions. Children would request seconds and thirds, their plates sticky with syrup. Today's frozen French toast can't match this homemade version. Bacon-wrapped maple sausages were the sweet and savory breakfast that disappeared from platters before anything else hit the table. Grandmothers took breakfast sausage links and wrapped each one in a half strip of bacon, securing it with toothpicks. The sausages were brushed generously with pure maple syrup. As they cooked, the bacon rendered its fat while crisping up, and the maple syrup created a sticky coating. The result was intensely flavorful, combining smoky bacon, seasoned sausage, and sweet maple in every bite. These were finger food breakfast, meant to be grabbed with napkins. Children loved the sweetness and the novelty. The preparation filled homes with the irresistible smell of bacon and maple that woke everyone naturally. Grandmothers often made extra because these would vanish fast. This breakfast represented indulgence, proof that Thanksgiving morning deserved special treatment. Pecan pie overnight oats gave busy Thanksgiving cooks something healthy that could be grabbed from the refrigerator without any morning effort. Grandmothers combined rolled oats with milk, brown sugar, chopped pecans, cinnamon, and vanilla in mason jars the night before. The mixture sat in the refrigerator overnight, with the oats absorbing liquid and softening into creamy porridge. In the morning, the jars were topped with extra pecans and maple syrup. The beauty was in the convenience and the fact that everything was made ahead. Families could eat breakfast at different times as people woke up. The flavor was familiar and comforting, connecting breakfast to the pecan pie that would appear later. Health-conscious relatives appreciated having something with oats and nuts. Children enjoyed eating from their own individual jars, feeling grown up. This breakfast represented modern convenience applied to traditional flavors. Cornmeal johnnycakes with honey butter were the rustic breakfast that connected Thanksgiving morning to America's earliest cooking traditions. Grandmothers mixed stone-ground cornmeal with boiling water, salt, and sugar, creating a thick batter that was spooned onto hot griddles greased with bacon fat. The cakes cooked until golden brown and crispy at the edges. These weren't fluffy like modern pancakes, but dense and satisfying. The honey butter was whipped by hand, combining softened butter with honey. Families served these on Thanksgiving morning as a nod to Native American foodways and the first Thanksgiving story. The cakes were filling and economical, using cornmeal that was cheaper than wheat flour. Adults appreciated their heartiness. The simplicity felt appropriate for Thanksgiving, reminding everyone that gratitude started with basic sustenance. Today's instant pancake mixes can't replicate the authentic corn flavor. Butternut squash fritters brought vegetable-forward eating to Thanksgiving breakfast, turning winter squash into crispy cakes that satisfied like meat. Grandmothers roasted butternut squash the day before, then mashed the tender flesh with eggs, flour, scallions, and warm spices like nutmeg. The mixture was formed into patties and pan-fried in butter until golden brown, creating fritters that were savory and slightly sweet. The exterior crisped beautifully while the interior stayed soft. These were served with sour cream on the side. Families appreciated having a vegetable dish at breakfast. Children who normally rejected squash would eat these happily. The fritters used up extra squash from pre-Thanksgiving cooking experiments. Adults loved them with coffee, finding the savory flavors perfect for morning. This breakfast represented creativity, proving that Thanksgiving vegetables deserved attention at every meal. Brown sugar bacon was the candy-like breakfast meat that turned ordinary bacon strips into something special enough for Thanksgiving morning. Grandmothers laid thick-cut bacon on rimmed baking sheets, then pressed brown sugar firmly onto each strip. The bacon baked slowly in the oven until the fat rendered, and the sugar melted into a glossy glaze that was smoky, salty, and sweet. The kitchen filled with an aroma that was impossible to resist. The bacon emerged from the oven sticky and crisp, with caramelized edges that shattered between teeth. These strips were dangerous because eating one meant craving 5 more. Grandmothers often doubled the recipe, knowing everyone would want more than a civilized portion. The bacon appeared on breakfast platters but also disappeared as snacks throughout the morning. Children would sneak pieces when Grandma's back was turned. This breakfast represented pure indulgence. Cinnamon roll casserole transformed individual pastries into a shareable breakfast that fed Thanksgiving crowds without the fuss. Grandmothers cut cinnamon rolls into quarters and arranged them in buttered baking dishes. A custard mixture of eggs, milk, vanilla, and cinnamon was poured over the top, soaking overnight. In the morning, the casserole baked until puffy and golden. A simple glaze of powdered sugar and milk was drizzled over the warm casserole. This breakfast solved the problem of feeding many people without standing over the stove. Families loved it because it could be assembled the night before. The smell of cinnamon and baked dough filled homes with warmth. Children fought over corner pieces with extra glaze, while adults appreciated having something sweet with their coffee. This breakfast proved that convenience and indulgence could coexist perfectly on Thanksgiving morning. Turkey sausage and sage breakfast patties were the lighter alternative to pork sausage, bringing Thanksgiving flavors to the morning table. Grandmothers mixed ground turkey with fresh sage, thyme, black pepper, and sometimes maple syrup, forming the mixture into small patties. The patties were pan-fried in butter until golden brown, filling kitchens with the herbal aroma of sage. These tasted like Thanksgiving dressing in breakfast form, with sage providing that distinctive holiday flavor. Families appreciated the turkey option because it felt healthier while still being satisfying. The patties could be made ahead and reheated on Thanksgiving morning. They paired perfectly with eggs and toast. Adults who were health-conscious loved having a leaner protein option. Children often preferred these to regular sausage because the flavors were familiar. The sage and turkey combination became so associated with the holiday that eating them any other time felt wrong. Caramelized apple and brie crepes were the elegant breakfast that made Thanksgiving morning feel sophisticated. Grandmothers made thin crepes from scratch, whisking together flour, eggs, milk, and melted butter until smooth. The batter was poured onto hot buttered pans and cooked until lightly golden. Apples were sliced and caramelized in butter with brown sugar and cinnamon until tender. Creamy brie was placed inside each crepe along with the warm apples. Then the crepes were folded into quarters. The combination of sweet apples, melted cheese, and delicate crepes was unexpectedly perfect. Families who usually ate simpler breakfasts felt fancy eating these. The crepes required skill and attention, but impressed guests tremendously. Adults loved them with coffee, while children were divided. This breakfast proved that Thanksgiving morning could be refined without being fussy, elevating the holiday with French-inspired elegance. Cornbread stuffing waffles were the genius breakfast that repurposed leftover Thanksgiving prep into something completely new. Grandmothers took prepared cornbread stuffing and pressed it into hot waffle irons, creating crispy squares that were savory and herby. The waffle iron transformed the stuffing into something with crunchy exterior and tender interior, with herbs like sage perfuming every bite. These were topped with gravy, fried eggs, or cranberry sauce for those who loved sweet and savory combinations. The beauty was in the resourcefulness, turning what might have been wasted into creative breakfast. Families loved them because they tasted like Thanksgiving dinner but felt appropriate for morning. Children thought eating stuffing for breakfast was hilarious. Adults appreciated the protein and the crispy edges. The waffles could be made with leftover stuffing after Thanksgiving too, extending holiday flavors into the weekend. This breakfast proved that creativity in the kitchen knew no boundaries. Pumpkin bread pudding with bourbon sauce was the decadent breakfast that blurred the line between morning meal and dessert. Grandmothers cubed day-old bread and soaked it in a custard mixture of eggs, cream, pumpkin puree, cinnamon, and nutmeg overnight. The pudding baked until puffy and golden. The bourbon sauce was made by melting butter with brown sugar and a generous splash of bourbon, creating a rich glaze. The combination was intensely flavorful, with pumpkin providing earthiness and bourbon adding warmth. This breakfast was reserved for adult gatherings or late morning brunches. Families loved it because it used up stale bread while creating something luxurious. The bourbon was optional but traditional, giving the dish a grown-up edge. Adults would linger over second helpings, their coffee cups refilled multiple times. This breakfast represented indulgence and celebration, perfect for holidays when rules could be bent. Cranberry walnut coffee cake was the breakfast centerpiece that looked impressive but came together with surprising ease. Grandmothers made a tender cake batter with sour cream for moisture, then folded in fresh cranberries and chopped walnuts. The batter was poured into pans and topped with a cinnamon streusel mixture. The cake emerged from the oven golden and fragrant, with tart cranberries creating pockets of brightness. A simple powdered sugar glaze was drizzled over the top once cool. This cake was perfect for Thanksgiving morning because it could be baked the day before and still taste fresh. Families would slice thick pieces to enjoy with coffee while the turkey started roasting. The combination of tart cranberries and nutty walnuts felt seasonal. Children picked out the walnuts but loved the cake itself. Adults appreciated having something substantial with their coffee. The cake disappeared quickly, with people returning for second slices throughout the morning. Apple cinnamon quinoa bowls were the healthy breakfast that gave Thanksgiving morning nutrition without sacrificing flavor or comfort. Grandmothers cooked quinoa in apple cider instead of water, infusing the grains with natural sweetness. Diced apples were sautéed in butter with cinnamon until tender, then spooned over the cooked quinoa. The bowls were topped with chopped pecans, maple syrup, and sometimes Greek yogurt. The result was warm, satisfying, and surprisingly filling. Families appreciated having a healthier option on a day known for indulgence. The quinoa could be made ahead and reheated, making it practical. Health-conscious relatives loved having something substantial that wasn't heavy. Children were often skeptical but would try it when they saw adults enjoying it. The combination of warm quinoa and sweet apples felt comforting. This breakfast proved that nutritious food could still taste indulgent and feel appropriate for celebrations. Cheddar Bay biscuit breakfast sandwiches combined the beloved restaurant-style biscuits with eggs and sausage for a handheld Thanksgiving meal. Grandmothers made biscuits with shredded cheddar, garlic powder, and melted butter, creating savory breakfast bread. The biscuits were split open while warm and filled with fried eggs, breakfast sausage, and sometimes sharp cheddar. The combination was salty, satisfying, and substantial. These sandwiches were perfect for family members who needed to eat quickly before tackling Thanksgiving tasks. The cheddar biscuits were impressive enough to feel special, but practical. Children loved them because they were fun to eat and tasted like a treat. Adults appreciated having protein and carbs in a portable format. The sandwiches could be wrapped in foil and kept warm, making them ideal for feeding people on different schedules. This breakfast represented convenience meeting indulgence, proving that holiday food didn't have to be complicated to be special. Harvest fruit salad with honey lime dressing was the bright, refreshing breakfast that balanced heavier Thanksgiving morning dishes. Grandmothers combined seasonal fruits like apples, pears, persimmons, and pomegranate seeds in large bowls. The dressing was made from honey, fresh lime juice, and ginger. The fruits were tossed gently until everything glistened. The salad was colorful and beautiful, with red pomegranate seeds sparkling like jewels. Families loved having something fresh on a day that would later become heavy. The honey lime dressing elevated simple fruit into something special. Children would pick out their favorite fruits, while adults appreciated the refreshing contrast. The salad could be made the night before. Health-conscious relatives especially appreciated having something naturally sweet. This breakfast proved that simplicity and freshness could be just as special as elaborate preparations on Thanksgiving morning. Maple pecan granola was the make-ahead breakfast that filled homes with the smell of toasted nuts and warm spices. Grandmothers mixed rolled oats with chopped pecans, pumpkin seeds, and coconut flakes, then tossed everything with maple syrup, melted butter, cinnamon, and salt. The mixture was spread on baking sheets and baked slowly until golden. The granola could be stored in jars for weeks, making it perfect when oven space was precious. Families would pour it into bowls with cold milk or layer it with yogurt. The maple flavor connected breakfast to other holiday dishes. Children loved it because it tasted like dessert. Adults appreciated having something quick to eat while managing Thanksgiving prep. The granola was often made as gifts too. This breakfast proved that homemade was always better than store-bought, with flavors that captured the essence of Thanksgiving morning. Sage and onion breakfast hash brought savory Thanksgiving flavors to morning plates with crispy potatoes and aromatic herbs. Grandmothers diced potatoes into small cubes and fried them in bacon grease with sliced onions until golden brown. Fresh sage leaves were torn and scattered over the hash, their earthy flavor perfuming every bite. Sometimes sausage or bacon was added for extra protein. The hash was served topped with fried eggs, the runny yolks creating natural sauce. This breakfast was hearty and filling, perfect for people who needed substantial fuel. The sage made it taste distinctly Thanksgiving. Families loved it because it was simple to prepare but tasted special. Children would eat around the onions but devour the crispy potatoes. Adults appreciated how it used basic ingredients to create something memorable. This hash proved that breakfast could be as savory and satisfying as any dinner, bringing Thanksgiving flavors to morning. Gingerbread pancakes with cream cheese drizzle brought holiday cookie flavors to Thanksgiving morning. Grandmothers mixed pancake batter with molasses, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves, creating pancakes that were dark and spiced. The batter was cooked on buttered griddles until bubbles formed, then flipped. The cream cheese drizzle was made by whisking softened cream cheese with powdered sugar and milk until smooth. The pancakes were stacked and drizzled generously. The combination was unexpected and delicious, with warm spices playing against tangy cream cheese. These pancakes felt festive and special, like eating gingerbread cookies in more satisfying form. Children loved them because they tasted like dessert. Adults appreciated the seasonal flavors that put them in the Thanksgiving mood. The pancakes could be kept warm in the oven. This breakfast proved that holiday baking flavors belonged at breakfast just as much as dessert, bringing celebration to morning meals. Roasted vegetable frittata was the elegant breakfast that showcased autumn's best produce in golden egg custard. Grandmothers roasted vegetables like Brussels sprouts, butternut squash, and red onions until caramelized, then arranged them in cast-iron skillets. Beaten eggs mixed with cream, parmesan, and herbs were poured over the vegetables. The frittata baked until puffed and golden. The result was colorful, impressive, and packed with nutrition. This breakfast could be served hot or at room temperature. Families loved it because it looked fancy but was actually simple. The vegetables provided vitamins on a day that would later focus on richer foods. Adults especially appreciated having something substantial yet light. Children would pick out their favorite vegetables. The frittata could be cut into wedges and eaten with hands. This breakfast proved that vegetables belonged at breakfast, not just dinner, bringing balance to Thanksgiving morning. Pear and almond clafoutis was the French-inspired breakfast that turned simple ingredients into something sophisticated. Grandmothers sliced ripe pears and arranged them in buttered baking dishes. A batter made from eggs, milk, flour, sugar, and almond extract was poured over the fruit. The clafoutis baked until puffed and golden, with custardy centers. Sliced almonds were scattered over the top before baking, adding crunch. The finished dish was dusted with powdered sugar while still warm. This breakfast fell somewhere between pancake and custard, with the pears providing natural sweetness. Families loved it because it looked impressive but came together quickly. The almond flavor elevated it beyond ordinary breakfast. Adults appreciated having something that felt special. Children loved the sweet pears and custardy texture. The clafoutis could be served warm or room temperature. This breakfast proved that European elegance belonged at American Thanksgiving tables, bringing sophistication to morning. Whole wheat pumpkin waffles brought wholesome nutrition to Thanksgiving morning without sacrificing flavor. Grandmothers mixed whole wheat flour with pumpkin puree, eggs, milk, and warm spices. The whole wheat added nutty flavor while the pumpkin kept the waffles moist. These were cooked in waffle irons until crispy outside. The waffles were more substantial than those made with white flour, keeping families full longer. Health-conscious cooks loved having a breakfast option that provided whole grains. The pumpkin added vitamins and natural sweetness. Children couldn't tell these were healthier because they tasted just as good as regular waffles. Adults appreciated starting Thanksgiving with something wholesome before the indulgent meal ahead. The waffles could be made ahead and reheated. This breakfast proved that healthy and delicious weren't mutually exclusive, bringing balance to Thanksgiving morning without sacrificing celebration or flavor. Caramel apple cider donuts were the sweet breakfast that captured fall flavors in portable form. Grandmothers made cake donuts with apple cider reduced until concentrated, adding intense apple flavor. The batter included cinnamon and nutmeg, creating donuts that tasted like autumn. Once fried or baked, the donuts were glazed with caramel made from butter and brown sugar. The glaze hardened slightly as it cooled. These donuts were served on platters for families to grab while rushing through morning preparations. The apple cider flavor was distinct and delicious. Children loved having donuts for breakfast, feeling like it was a special treat. Adults appreciated the homemade quality and the way the flavors fit the holiday. The donuts could be made the night before. This breakfast proved that bakery-quality treats could come from home kitchens, bringing joy and sweetness to the start of Thanksgiving without requiring hours of morning work. Sausage and cheddar grits casserole was the Southern breakfast that combined creamy grits, savory sausage, and sharp cheese into one dish. Grandmothers cooked stone-ground grits until tender, then stirred in butter, sharp cheddar cheese, and cooked breakfast sausage. Beaten eggs were folded in to help the casserole set, then everything was poured into buttered baking dishes. The casserole baked until golden on top with cheese bubbling at the edges. This breakfast could feed a crowd from a single dish, making it perfect when many relatives gathered. The grits provided comforting texture while the sausage added protein. Families loved it because it could be assembled the night before and baked in the morning. The Southern flavors felt appropriate for Thanksgiving. Children loved the cheesy richness, while adults appreciated the heartiness. The casserole could be cut into squares and served. This breakfast proved that humble ingredients could create something special and satisfying. Spiced chai tea scones brought the warming flavors of chai spices to Thanksgiving morning. Grandmothers mixed flour, butter, and cream with cardamom, cinnamon, ginger, and black pepper, creating dough that was flaky yet tender. The dough was shaped into rounds and cut into wedges, then brushed with cream and sprinkled with coarse sugar. The scones baked until golden brown, their tops crackled. These were served warm with butter or clotted cream. The chai spices provided warmth and complexity that felt perfect for autumn mornings. Families loved having scones because they felt special, elevating breakfast beyond ordinary fare. The spices complemented coffee and tea perfectly. Children enjoyed the sweet tops while adults appreciated the subtle spice. The scones could be made ahead and reheated quickly. This breakfast proved that simple baked goods with the right spices could transform morning meals into celebrations, bringing warmth and flavor to the start of Thanksgiving Day. Maple bacon Brussels sprouts were the surprising breakfast vegetable that converted Brussels sprouts haters into believers. Grandmothers halved fresh Brussels sprouts and roasted them with bacon pieces until crispy and caramelized. Maple syrup was drizzled over everything in the last few minutes, creating a sweet glaze. The combination was unexpectedly perfect, with maple sweetness balancing the slight bitterness while bacon added smokiness. This breakfast proved that vegetables could be exciting at any meal. Families loved having something green on Thanksgiving morning. The Brussels sprouts provided fiber and vitamins. Children who normally refused vegetables would try these because the bacon made them less intimidating. Adults appreciated having a savory vegetable option. The dish could be served warm or at room temperature. This breakfast proved that thinking creatively about vegetables could make them welcome at any meal, even Thanksgiving breakfast, when tradition usually ruled. Spinach and mushroom scramble turned a classic egg breakfast into a vibrant, vegetable-filled dish that matched the decade's growing interest in nutritious eating. Fresh spinach leaves were quickly wilted in a hot skillet, earthy mushrooms were sautéed until golden, and then beaten eggs were poured in to create a tender scramble flecked with greens. This hearty combination delivered iron, protein, and a savory depth of flavor that felt both rustic and sophisticated. Families appreciated that it required only a few simple ingredients while offering enough substance to keep everyone energized through school or work. Many homemakers added a small sprinkle of nutmeg or grated cheese to enhance the natural flavors, while health writers encouraged using olive oil instead of butter for a lighter touch. Served with a slice of whole grain toast or fresh fruit, the spinach and mushroom scramble quickly became a breakfast favorite for those who wanted something more exciting than plain eggs, but less indulgent than a rich omelet. It perfectly showcased how the 1960s embraced vegetables as stars of the morning table. Molasses milk with soda crackers. Sounds strange now, but for rural families and Depression-era kitchens, it was a fast, practical breakfast when the fridge was nearly bare. You would warm up some milk, stir in molasses for sweetness, and crumble soda crackers right on top. That was it. It was not fancy, but it filled you up, gave you a little energy, and made use of things that lasted forever in the pantry. Molasses was cheaper than sugar and packed with nutrients. Soda crackers were everywhere, and milk, fresh or canned, was always a breakfast staple. Old farm cookbooks, church recipe cards, and rural homemaker guides all had versions of this tucked inside, passed around by folks who knew how to stretch the simplest ingredients. It was humble, filling, and comforting in its own odd way. These days, it is almost unheard of, replaced by granola bars and cereal bowls. But back then, this quiet little breakfast got people through hard mornings with nothing but warm milk and a little ingenuity. Leftover pie was not a rebellion, it was a decision. A choice made in kitchens where rules were more of a suggestion and sugar was always welcome. You would open the fridge in the morning, see that lonely wedge of apple or cherry pie sitting on a plate, and suddenly breakfast made itself. No need to reheat, no shame. Just grab a fork and go. Pie for breakfast felt like getting away with something. And maybe it was. But no one questioned it because it made sense. Fruit, check. Carbs, check. A little bit of joy to start the day? Absolutely. Parents might roll their eyes, but they would take a bite too. It was efficient, especially if someone forgot to buy cereal. And let us be honest, some pies tasted better cold anyway, especially when you were too tired to toast anything and too hungry to wait. The crust would flake just enough, the filling would still hold together, and the coffee would cut right through the sweetness. Vinegar pie for breakfast is something that really just doesn't even sound like a real meal. It honestly sounds like some kind of prank, but no. This is a very real dish, and it actually works in more ways than one. For starters, this doesn't really taste the way you think it would. I know you're imagining some really bitter, acidic notes from the vinegar, but the initial flavor beats are sweet tart, and they give off a very custardy vibe. It's a bit like a lemon chess pie, but just made with your typical pantry staples instead this time. The vinegar is the star of the show, as it should be, and it cuts through almost every other flavor present in the pie, but not to the point where you would think all you can taste here is just vinegar. It's rich. It has this tangy brightness that actually is very stimulating for your taste buds, and if you pair it up with some hot coffee, then it works as well as Bruno Mars does with Anderson .Paak. Vinegar pie is something that strangely, despite being a pretty innovative and flavorful hit, is something that would be called a desperation pie because it's something that was made mostly by the women of the South and the Midwest living in rural populations. Ham and red-eye gravy is something that's considered a Southern classic. It has a really bold, salty personality, and it's a very no-nonsense flavor profile as well. This is a dish that takes country ham, which is typically dry-cured and goes the pan-frying route. The idea is to fry it until you see those dark brown edges crisping up in the pan. After that, you get an incredible flavor explosion in the form of concentrated pork drippings, and these then take a further unexpected turn. You start to pour in strong black coffee. Now I know you're about to fast forward 10 seconds, but hear me out, okay? The result isn't creamy or thick like you would expect. The coffee ends up deglazing the pan, and it creates this super thin reddish-brown gravy that has an unmistakable sheen to it. The result is a punchy, smoky, and bitter-tasting gravy, but not overwhelmingly bitter, and the coffee cuts through a lot of the richness of the ham fat. This is something you would see so commonly among rail workers in Tennessee and Alabama, especially if it was in the afternoon hours. The caffeine really helped with the job. So a peanut butter molasses sandwich is pretty much as good as it gets. It's old-school lunchbox energy, and it's sticky, sweet, and salty. It's pretty much made to power you through the day on a mostly low-key budget, and it's also exactly what it sounds like. This is a very hearty smear of peanut butter, and it's usually something that's layered with a drizzle of molasses on plain sandwich bread. Molasses tend to add this really deep, smoky sweetness that's a lot more intense than any kind of honey or jelly, and the peanut butter essentially rings the salt and fat. This makes it really well balanced and filling, and the sandwich shows up a lot more during times when economic crises were your average Tuesday. I'm talking about periods like the Depression and the middle part of the 1940s, where even an egg was not really promised to you. This was especially true for people in working-class homes. Peanut butter was something that people loved because it was really heavy in protein and dense, and it would work more often than not with molasses. The boldness and earthy sweetness of molasses actually bounced off really well with the richness of the peanut butter, and it's not a light sandwich at all. Vienna sausages were not meant to be breakfast, but try telling that to someone who grew up opening a can of them before school. They were soft, salty, vaguely meat-like tubes packed in gelatinous goo. You would slice them up and fry them with eggs, or just eat them cold if time was tight. They were cheap, shelf-stable, and wildly popular in kitchens where making do was the motto. And you could not really tell what kind of meat they were made from, probably on purpose. But if your morning started with that slippery thwop of the can opening and the smell of brine hitting the air, you knew you were not getting pancakes. It was not glamorous, but it worked. Pair it with instant coffee and maybe some toast, and you had a meal. Sort of. Vienna sausages were part of a broader trend. Breakfast that was fast, filling, and required absolutely zero questions. And for those who remember the taste, the texture, or even just the tin can, you probably remember what came next too. A cereal so sugary it needed coffee just to balance it out. Cream cheese and jelly sandwiches were one of those quiet kitchen tricks passed down from old homemaker guides, perfect for rushed mornings when the fridge looked bare, but breakfast still had to happen. You would take soft white bread, spread on a swipe of cream cheese, and finish it off with grape jelly or whatever jam was on hand. That was it. Served cold or lightly toasted, it was fast, sweet, and filling enough to count. For a lot of families, this sandwich was a saving grace on mornings when eggs were too expensive and cereal boxes were empty. Cream cheese made it creamy, the jelly brought the sweetness, and together they turned plain bread into something that actually stuck with you through the morning. You could find versions of this recipe in old community cookbooks, lunchbox ideas, and school pamphlets reminding parents how to keep breakfast simple. Somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside by granola bars and frozen breakfast sandwiches, but back then, it was a 10-minute meal that worked every time. Funny how those easy, no-fuss breakfasts slipped through the cracks. Poached eggs on spinach English. Muffins offered a lighter, vegetable-rich cousin of eggs Florentine, perfect for families embracing wholesome trends of the 1960s. Fresh spinach leaves were quickly sautéed until just wilted, then piled onto toasted whole wheat English muffins that provided a nutty, hearty base. Perfectly poached eggs rested gently on top, their golden yolks ready to spill into the greens and bread below, creating a creamy sauce without the need for heavy hollandaise. This elegant yet simple breakfast supplied protein, iron, and vitamins, making it a favorite for health-conscious parents and a delight for anyone craving a satisfying but not overly rich meal. Many home cooks seasoned the dish with a pinch of nutmeg or a squeeze of lemon to brighten the flavor, while others served it with fresh fruit on the side. Poached eggs on spinach. English muffins captured the spirit of the decade's back-to-nature movement, proving that a balanced breakfast could also be beautiful and full of flavor. Baked bean toast was the quick, savory breakfast that filled countless plates across New England when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something hot and satisfying. You would toast a slice of bread, spoon on canned baked beans, maybe top it with cheese or butter, and slide it under the broiler. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, hearty enough to carry you through a long day. Families loved it because it was affordable, practical, and good enough to stretch one can of beans into a meal for the whole house. Old cookbooks, factory lunch guides, and frugal homemaker magazines all praised this trick for making mornings easy without giving up flavor. Some folks added mustard or hot sauce, others kept it plain, but either way, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly filled bellies when nothing else seemed to last. These days, it barely gets a mention, but back then, baked bean toast was one of those small comforts that made hard mornings feel bearable. If you have ever stood in front of a stove flipping cornmeal slices while the rest of the house was still dark, then you already know. This was comfort food with calluses. But sometimes, breakfast took a hard left turn into the bizarre, like when eggs were not enough. So you added ketchup. There is no middle ground with ketchup on scrambled eggs. You either grew up with it or you think it is culinary heresy. But for millions of American kids, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, it was just how breakfast worked. Eggs were cheap, ketchup was everywhere. Put the two together and you had a meal that felt familiar, even if it looked like something from a preschool food fight. This was not about haute cuisine, it was about speed and taste. Kids loved it because ketchup made everything taste like a hot dog. Parents loved it because it kept the complaining to a minimum. And let us be honest, these were not fluffy French omelets. These were dry, overcooked eggs tossed in a pan until they barely held together. The ketchup gave them life. It also gave them color, which was important in a decade where most food was beige. Some folks even added it to fried eggs or egg sandwiches, claiming it just worked. And if you still do it today, no judgment. Nostalgia is powerful stuff. But ketchup was not the only flavor booster in town. Sometimes, you needed something with a bit more iron. Tallow fried potatoes are the OG French fries. They're insanely flavorful. They have that beautiful golden sheen to them, and they're about as crispy as you would want the perfect batch of French fries to be. A lot of that color, vividness, and flavor comes from the fact that they're fried in rendered beef fat instead of vegetable oil. Now, back in the day, and I mean way before the 80s, fast food joints like McDonald's were actually using beef tallow in their fries as well. That was a big part of what gave them that original iconic flavor. Tallow helps potatoes achieve a savory flavor that they would never be able to get to on their own. Plus, this just isn't there today with the modern oils we have. The best part really was the exterior, because a simple first bite was about as close to nirvana as you could get. If you were eating these when you were borderline starving, then you were pretty much about to have the best food experience of your life. Tallow was the go-to frying fat for a lot of American diners and fast food kitchens, and it's just not hard to see why. And then, you ever have leftovers but you don't want to make what you had last night? So fried cornmeal mush with syrup was this really golden, crispy edge throwback to times where meals like this counted as a wonderful breakfast. It was made from what was essentially just a chilled polenta, or otherwise known as cornmeal mush. You would slice these into thick slabs, pan-fry them until the outside was a complete crackling crust, and then the inside would stay really soft, dense, and creamy. Topping these with a bit of drizzle, sorghum and maple would complete the experience, and you would be enjoying a beautiful contrast of textures, flavors, and the crunchiness of it all. Cornmeal is a deeply hearty dish. It's something that sticks with you, and the nutty flavors help with that. This was a dish that was so common amongst Midwestern farm families and Southern homes throughout the 1800s and 1940s, and that was partially because cornmeal was so abundant that people just made up different versions of similar dishes. You will find it in old cookbooks, certain off-road diners that really try to stick to the whole mid-90s vibe, and Southern homes, but it's largely something that just doesn't get much traction anymore. Even still, cornmeal mush was amazing and deserves to have its name in the Hall of Fame of easy, convenient breakfasts you can rely on. Oatmeal water porridge is something that sounds like it's ripped right out of a Depression-era cookbook, but that's only because it really is. It was supposed to be this zero-wastage dish that would inspire people to make the most out of the least, but it didn't really go past poor farming communities and immigrant-dense areas. What it was good for was digestion, though, because this was insanely light on the stomach, while also being really filling. So the parents that did know about this would make it obsessively for their children, and back then, kids were a lot more cool about putting up with oatmeal. It was also perfect sick person food. Plus, even if none of that applied to a person back then, they'd still probably be living paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes, oatmeal helps when it's not payday yet. The point being, that everyone had a run-in with this at some point, but only a select few communities made a thing out of it regularly. Oatmeal water porridge is just oats simmered in plain water too, so it makes sense why it didn't go too far in the broader world. You don't have milk, sugar, or any extras here, and it was pretty much the definition of what you would call frugal. It was used in times when dairy was really unavailable and money just wasn't there, and texture-wise, it's a lot thinner than you can imagine. All that to say, it's likely not the most appealing bite. Jelly roll-ups on white bread were the quick breakfast treat every kid from the 1950s to the 70s knew by heart. You would flatten a slice of white bread, spread on a little jam, roll it up tight, and slice it into pinwheels. Breakfast was done in under 10 minutes, fun to eat, and easy enough that even kids could make their own. Families leaned on meals like this when mornings were rushed, but you still needed something sweet to start the day. It was a trick you would find in lunchbox guides, homemaker columns, and those old spiral-bound cookbooks hiding in every kitchen drawer. Some folks added peanut butter, others kept it plain with jelly. But either way, it turned bread and jam into a quick, cheerful breakfast that actually stuck with you. Somewhere along the way, roll-ups disappeared under cereal boxes and toaster pastries. But back then, it was one of those small, forgotten meals that made mornings just a little brighter. Cranberry walnut yogurt. Parfaits brought a new sense of sophistication to the American breakfast table as yogurt emerged as a fashionable health food during the 1960s. Layers of tart cranberries, crunchy walnuts, and creamy plain yogurt created a colorful glass that looked as appealing as it tasted. The natural sweetness of the fruit balanced the tang of the yogurt, while the nuts added satisfying texture and plant-based protein, making it a filling yet refreshing option for busy mornings. Many homemakers prepared the components the night before, allowing the flavors to mingle and saving precious time before school or work. Food writers praised this parfait as a smart alternative to sugary cereals, and it quickly became a favorite at brunch gatherings where presentation mattered as much as taste. Variations included a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of homemade granola, reflecting the era's creative spirit and interest in natural ingredients. Cranberry walnut yogurt. Parfaits captured the decade's blend of health consciousness and visual flair, turning an ordinary breakfast into a small celebration. Poached egg. Over-stewed tomatoes was the kind of savory breakfast you would only find in old church cookbooks or handwritten recipe cards from a neighbor down the street. It was practical, filling, and ready in under 10 minutes, even if it sounded a little fancy. You would poach an egg, ladle some stewed tomatoes onto a plate, and serve it all with day-old biscuits or plain toast. The tomatoes were sweet and tangy, the egg added protein, and together they made breakfast that actually stuck with you through the morning. Families leaned on meals like this when money was tight and groceries were limited, especially during the Great Depression or lean years after the war. You did not need much: canned tomatoes, an egg, maybe some stale bread, and suddenly breakfast felt warm, filling, and just a little different than the usual toast. These meals disappeared as boxed cereals and frozen breakfasts took over, but back then it was one of the quiet ways people got through the morning with what little they had. Hot Dr. Pepper was real. It was not a prank. It was not a joke. It was an actual breakfast drink, served warm, with a slice of lemon floating on top like it belonged there. In the 1960s and 1970s, the Dr. Pepper Company rolled out ads urging families to heat their soda in a saucepan and drink it like tea. And people did. They poured it into mugs, called it comforting, and sipped it alongside eggs and toast like this was totally normal. There was something oddly cozy about sipping soda that steamed like coffee, even if it tasted like fizzy syrup trying to be sophisticated. It was part science experiment, part nostalgia bomb. One sip, and you were either delighted or deeply confused. It smelled like caramelized chemicals and tasted like soda-flavored syrup with a citrus twist. Kids loved it, adults tolerated it, and on cold winter mornings, it hit the spot, mostly because you had no idea what else to serve. The lemon slice added a whiff of class, even though the whole idea screamed experimental chemistry. If you ever walked into a kitchen that smelled like a candy factory was melting, chances are someone had a pot of soda on the stove. And if that was your idea of a warm beverage, then you are probably still wondering why it disappeared. But hot soda was not the only strange liquid to hit the breakfast table. Some folks poured something even weirder into a glass and called it a meal: eggless pancakes. So the first time you hear that, you just automatically think that there's no real reason why these should exist, because what's next? Brickless buildings? But really, eggless pancakes have been around for far longer than you would think. This is especially true for lean periods like the Great Depression or wartime rationing in the 1940s, and a lot of eggs back then were actually decently more expensive than people could afford, or they just weren't available because somebody who could afford them likely scooped most of them up. COVID-era bulk buying wasn't really an isolated event, I guess. Most recipes would essentially just rely on baking powder for the fluff and use some kind of oil or milk along with flour. Old-school versions, and I mean proper vintage recipes, would even include mashed bananas, vinegar, and some applesauce, and that's some proper veganism if you ask me. Eggless pancakes have largely faded into the background now, but they were definitely one of the most affordable meals our grandparents grew up with back in the day. Mutton sausages are these super earthy, super robust, and unapologetically meaty dishes that offer an entire world of flavor for those willing to traverse its savory depths. They're grounded until they are extremely coarse, and the chew is something that lets you know you're eating something with a lot of flavor in it. Speaking of flavor, this is something that strikes a lot of unique notes. It's grassy, a bit gamey, and extremely savory, but it's seasoned in a very different way. You have blends of parsley, garlic, pepperjack, allspice, even nutmeg in there. People would also make really traditional blends with things like rosemary, black pepper, garlic, and a bit of vinegar. When you would cook these, the fat would slowly render out, and this would baste the meat internally, making it an incredible flavor festival for meat lovers. Maple syrup toast with warmed butter was the farmhouse kitchen's answer to rushed mornings when breakfast still needed to feel comforting, even if the fridge was nearly bare. You would toast a slice of bread, slather on warm butter, and drizzle real maple syrup over the top. That was it. Sweet, buttery, and ready in under 10 minutes. Families loved it because it was practical, made from pantry staples, and good enough to carry you through a long morning of chores, school, or factory work. Some folks added cinnamon, others kept it plain, but either way, it turned toast into something that felt a little indulgent. You could find versions of this in old rural cookbooks, passed down through generations of families who knew how to stretch groceries without cutting corners on comfort. Somewhere along the way, breakfast like this disappeared under the weight of boxed cereals and fast food menus. But back then, it was one of those quiet meals that actually made mornings bearable. Funny how something so simple could be so easy to forget. Buttered saltine crackers with tea was not a snack. It was survival disguised as sophistication. You would take plain saltines, smear a bit of butter, or margarine if that is all you had, and pair it with a weak cup of tea. That was breakfast. No jam, no eggs, no sides, just crunch and steam. And somehow it worked. This was common in households where the bread ran out early and payday was still a few days away. But it did not feel like scraping the bottom. It felt intentional. A little quiet moment, sitting by the window with a tin of crackers and a chipped teacup. Sometimes, if you were lucky, the butter was soft. Other times it would tear the cracker in half and you would eat it in pieces. It was humble, yes, but not pitiful. That is the thing about old-school breakfasts. They stretched what little you had and made it count. Every bite was a memory. Every sip of lukewarm tea was a tiny reset button for the day ahead. But crackers were just the start. Some mornings, the real magic happened when last night's cornmeal was fried into gold. Boiled wheat berries and sugar syrup porridge is something that's the kind of breakfast that just transports you through time. It takes you back to a world where everything is made from scratch. There's no back of the label you have to read, and the phrase pre-packaged isn't something your kids know yet. Nothing went to waste. Everything was fresh. It was what Cartoon Network made you think the world was going to be like. or those Disney and Ghibli movies. Just anything with a hint of soul, you know? The wheat berries were really exquisite too. The ideal thing for putting somebody in a food coma. Flavor-wise, this is as rustic and comforting as it gets. The wheat berries have a very nutty aroma to them, an incredibly chewy texture, and the syrup is something that gives a very nice sweetness. It makes the dish feel like a wonderful treat without really doing too much, and the syrup is something that really adds to that. It's one of those breakfasts that really makes a cold morning into a scene ripped right out of some indie film. The porridge was something that peaked in popularity throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, and that was especially true for rural households where wheat was very cheap and accessible. Today, it's a nostalgic recipe you find in ancient cookbooks, but it's worth making. Turnip greens and cornmeal dumplings are a dish that confuses you. Is this survival food? Is this a nice little experiment with dumplings and vegetables? It feels like both. It was actually used in both ways too, so you would be pretty spot on with that assessment. See, people love to have fun with the things they did back then, even if those things were rooted in practicality and optimization. The turnip greens were something you simmered slowly, taking pleasure in the little things in life. You would absorb all the scents, fragrances, and aromas, and honestly, just doing that would kill most of your hunger. Plus, when they would get ready, they would turn silky and dark, and they had this really warm glisten to them. Swimming in a pot liquor broth that was abundant with pork fat, usually from a ham hock, it set the stage for an extremely soulful dish that knows what it's about. The cornmeal dumplings were then thrown into the pot, the perfect addition for something to revitalize your spirits. Soft spoonfuls of cornmeal dough would be mixed with bubbling greens, as they created a perfect Ghibli vibe for you to immerse yourself in. Historically, this is a dish that has been very common in Black and poor white communities. It's easy to romanticize today, but it is also a dish that's rooted in struggle, poverty, and making the most out of very little. If you ever ate pie while standing in front of the fridge with a spoon and a guilty conscience, then welcome home. But not every shortcut was sweet. Some were warm, brown, and brewed from desperation. Postum was not coffee, it just looked like it was. For many families, it was the hot beverage of choice, especially when actual coffee was too expensive or frowned upon for kids. Made from roasted grains and molasses, Postum was marketed as the wholesome, caffeine-free alternative. And somehow people bought into that. You would stir a spoonful into hot water and try to convince yourself it tasted like something grown-ups would drink. It had this deep, earthy flavor that hovered somewhere between toasted bread and boiled pencil shavings. Not terrible, just different. And when paired with a piece of dry toast, it became a breakfast that felt oddly noble. You were not indulging. You were starting the day with restraint. Postum was the drink of war years, depression years, and anyone trying to avoid caffeine jitters. It was the beverage equivalent of "we make do." And if you sipped it from a chipped mug while flipping through the newspaper or stared out the window while steam fogged your glasses, then you get it. That kind of quiet breakfast was not rare. It was routine. But when even bread was running low, folks had to get creative with what they spread, or did not spread, on top. Peanut butter and honey milkshakes were the quick breakfast booster you would find in every 1960s teen handbook or homemaker guide promising energy in minutes. You would toss peanut butter, milk, and honey into a blender, give it a good mix, and breakfast was done before you could even finish your coffee. It sounds simple now, but back then it was practical, filling, and surprisingly satisfying. Parents loved it because it was affordable and kept teenagers full, and teenagers loved it because it tasted like dessert for breakfast. Some folks added ice or fruit if they had extra, but the basic recipe stayed the same. Peanut butter for protein, honey for sweetness, and milk to bring it all together. It showed up in old cookbooks, school lunch suggestions, and quick breakfast guides long before protein shakes and energy drinks filled grocery aisles. Somewhere along the way, it disappeared under the weight of modern trends, but back then, it was the kind of breakfast that quietly got families through rushed mornings with nothing but pantry staples and a blender. Sweet potato hash with onions, brought bold color and natural nutrition to the breakfast table at a time when Americans were looking for hearty yet healthful alternatives to white potatoes. Cubes of sweet potato were pan-fried until caramelized and golden, mingling with soft sautéed onions that added sweetness and depth. The dish delivered vitamin-rich comfort with every bite while offering a lower glycemic twist on traditional hash browns. Many families seasoned the hash with paprika, black pepper, or a hint of cayenne for subtle spice, while others tossed in chopped bell peppers or fresh herbs for extra freshness. Served alongside poached eggs or a slice of whole-grain toast, sweet potato hash with onions satisfied appetites and brightened plates with its orange hue. Magazines and community cookbooks praised it as both budget-friendly and nutritionally forward, showing how simple vegetables could create a meal worthy of a Sunday brunch or an everyday breakfast that nourished body and spirit. Which Thanksgiving breakfast would you bring back to your holiday morning? Drop it in the comments, hit like if these memories warmed your heart, and subscribe so we can keep celebrating forgotten family traditions together.